Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Top 5 Weekly. That's right, it is this show, but I am not your usual host, Dan Skip Allen. Tonight, doing the Top 5 Weekly, I am Jeremy the Adam Adams, filling in. Unfortunately, Dan is a little bit under the weather right now, but he'll be back soon. In the meantime, I'm really excited to be here, and we have a really awesome topic tonight. Tying in with another adaptation of The Invisible Man, we are doing Universal Monsters. That's right, some of the classic monsters, the movies that they've been in from that great studio of Universal. I'm really excited to be doing this. It's a little unusual, a little different than some of the topics we've done in the past. And I couldn't have two better guests with me tonight. Let's get these guys on. I'll introduce them. We'll jump into this. That's right. Starting off, we have Kirk, the consigliere Kolakowski. So glad to have you. How are you feeling to be talking some monsters tonight?
Absolutely. I loved it. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I love these movies. They're a lot of fun. I mean, this is where it all comes from with the monster movies. Everything we have nowadays comes from here. So it's great to go back to the roots and give these movies a little attention.
Yes, and our other guest, probably of all the younger guys I know, nobody loves the classic movies as much as this guy. It is Caleb, Boatfella Boatman. How are you feeling to be talking about this topic tonight? I get really excited anytime I see you talking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I want to give credit to this guy over here because he is the reason that I watched most of these because of a trivia match where he had this on the wheel. So, yeah, I really. What?
That's cool. So you did some catching up. That's cool.
yeah. Like before, last summer, I hadn't seen most of them, and then I watched through like a lot of them. So I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm glad to be talking about them because this is one that doesn't quite get talked about a lot, despite how many movies there are.
Yeah, exactly. And people these days, they think of, your Freddy's, your Jasons, but, we wouldn't have any of that stuff without the classic, iconic characters that kind of created it all. And, I just remember, seeing a lot of the movies like on TV in the 80s, they would just play on your local TV station. And they made such an impact on me, and they're really timeless in a lot of ways, so it'll be really exciting to talk about this. But the format, as we always do here, is pretty simple. We're each going to give our top 5 in this topic, starting with our 5, counting down to our 1. If we happen to have a movie that the other person has higher, they'll just tell us, and then we'll say, all right, wait, and we'll wait for that person until we do it. So let's go ahead, no further ado, start with number 5. I'm going to go ahead and start with the youngest tonight. Caleb, why don't you give us your number 5 first in this topic?
My number 5 was really tough because I kind of had to make some cuts. But I think for my number 5, I'm going to go with Dracula.
Do we have that one, Kirk?
I do not.
I actually don't either, surprisingly. So tell us all about Dracula there, Caleb.
Yeah, Dracula, it's a classic story. Bela Lugosi is giving an amazing performance in this, and the atmosphere. I think the star of the movie really is the atmosphere, directed by Todd Browning, and it just feels so creepy and like spooky and gothic, and I really love that. And Dwight Frye as Renfield. Is my favorite part of the movie. I think he's fantastic. Dwight Frye will probably come up again in a few of these other movies we'll talk about.
All right. Any thoughts there on the Dracula, Kirk?
Yeah. There's some of these I liked better. And there's I don't know if it's pacing or plotting issues I have with Dracula that kept it off my list. But yeah, Boatman hit the nail on the head. The atmosphere, the music. Renfield, that scene where he's down at the bottom of the boat and just looking up with that laugh and that hideous grin is such a great moment. There's a lot of really cool things to pull from this movie. Just a few that I like better.
Yeah, and for me, when you go to the early pre-code movies, when they're just I think that some of those real early movies do kind of suffer some pacing problems, and the original version of Dracula actually doesn't really have a musical score either. So for me, it doesn't quite have the propulsive sort of enjoyment that, some of the slightly later ones do for me. But, it is a classic film. It's definitely, an essential Universal monster film. It just didn't quite get there for me for various filmmaking reasons. But Bela Lugosi is, tremendous in this movie, bringing the character that he had played on stage. And you just see this fully realized take on this character. And I don't know that any other take on Dracula will ever quite, have the impact that this one had. And I also want to give a quick shout out that at the same time, they filmed a Mexican language, a Spanish language version of Dracula on the same sets Universal did. They used to do that back then, because they didn't have subtitles and stuff. So they would actually film alternate versions of movies, and that version is really, really good and a really interesting double feature with Dracula. So I just had to throw that out there. So Kirk, let's hear your number 5.
My top 3 were pretty much set when I started making the list, but the 4 and 5, there were a couple movies that could have made that, and I was actually right down to the wire right before we started. I was still making my decision. But my number 5 is actually a sequel. This is one I just watched the other day for the first time, and it is The Invisible Man Returns, starring Vincent Price.
Nice. I don't have that one. You great, Caleb?
I don't have that either.
All right, cool.
This one, I don't want to talk too much because, we'll probably talk about Invisible Man later, but what I love about this movie is that it builds on the lore and the science of the Invisible Man, the original movie. I like the way it ties in to the, a lot of the sequels for these movies are kind of cheap. A character dies and they just kind of show up in the next movie. They really don't get explanation. This one really ties in neatly to the original, and it has a different take on the whole status of the Invisible Man, where in the first one, it's almost like he's insane from the beginning. In this movie, you kind of see it happen with Vincent Price playing the Invisible Man character in this one. Does a really good job. And you see that arc where he's somebody who, out of desperation, he's been falsely accused of a crime, and his only mode of escape and to find the real killer is to take the invisibility formula. And it's kind of like a race against time to do everything he needs to do before he starts to lose his mind. He knows it's going to happen. It's just a matter of, can they fix him? Can they get do the antidote before he goes nuts? So it's a really good, like I said, advancement of the original story.
Yeah, have you seen this one, Caleb?
This is not one I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of the sequels, with the exception of the bigger sequels. I've seen more of the originals.
I've seen this one. It's been a while, but it's really good. It's definitely, I think, really worthy of being on a list. And it's really interesting to go back and see Vincent Price play, in this type of film years before he was kind of so closely identified with the genre. This is back when he was more of a more supporting player in dramas and melodramas and stuff like that. But occasionally he would pop up in a genre movie. And then, of course, 10 years later or so, you've got House of Wax and stuff, and he became iconic. But if you go back to this, he gives a really strong performance, and I think he is a good successor to Claude Rains from the original. So it's a very good pick.
And a lot of cool, I forgot to mention, a lot of cool invisibility effects in this too. For the time,
all the Invisible Man movies really do some innovative things with the effects, and it's really awesome to see. All right, so for my number 5, it is definitely a movie that counts in the Universal monster canon, and I think it's one of the most entertaining. It is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Do you guys have that one?
Hold your horses.
Yeah, all right. I had a feeling at least somebody would. All right.
Technically, it's actually my number 4, so we talk about it next anyway.
We'll just hop to you when you. Yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah, you're next.
I'm
number
next.
4. Yeah. So talk about it.
I mean, this is a very different type of monster movie, but it's really funny. Abbott and Costello are the classic comedy duo that kind of every comedy movie is kind of structuring themselves after. Yeah. And I think it works the fact that they do have a lot of it's not just they meet monsters. They meet the classic monsters, and the gag at the end with the Invisible Man. So that's great. I really like this one.
Yeah, it's it's interesting to go back and the things that we kind of take for granted now, like crossing genres and having horror comedies and stuff like that. Somebody had to do it first, and this is definitely one of the first examples of let's take a well-known comedy, star, in this case duo, and put them with well-known movie monsters. That was a novel idea then, and I think it still really, really works. It's a really funny movie. Those guys had done a lot of movies at that point, so they really kind of had their rhythm and everything down with the comedy. And I think, all the guys, that they got to come back to play the monsters again, just really, they get it. But they don't play, it's like the monsters are still the monsters. Like they still, and they're really, you could still, I think back in 48, still see people getting a little scared, when some of these guys are doing their thing. It takes it seriously enough. It's not like they're just, saying it's stupid or whatever. Like, they are taking it seriously. It's just these guys are kind of ridiculous and they're clowns and they're in the midst of these situations and they don't quite understand what's going on. So yeah, I loved it. I have to have it on my list. I think it's really fun and it really holds up in a lot of ways. Kirk, any thoughts on this one?
You know what? I have not worked my way up to the Abbott and Costello monster movies. But I mean, it sounds really interesting. Like you said, just that the innovation of that mashup. And it sounds, everything I hear about them, so there's a lot of cool moments in there and kind of like callbacks and respect for the original source material.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to definitely check those out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. All right, so we'll go to you next for your number 4, Kirk.
My number 4 will probably have been on somebody else's list. It's Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, I have that. All right, so we jump to me for my number 4. This is another one that I think in its franchise gets a little overlooked. It's absolutely one of my favorites. It's actually a threequel, a third one. It is Son of Frankenstein. Does anyone have this one?
Just barely missed.
Just barely. Okay, yeah. So this is the third Frankenstein film after, obviously, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, 1939. In this one, we have the great Basil Rathbone as a relative of Frankenstein coming back to the castle. And this is the movie that for the first time gives us the character of Igor, and he's played by Bela Lugosi, who, since I don't have Dracula on my list, I had to have Bela Lugosi represented somewhere. And I think he's really, really great in this movie. He's this conniving guy who's kind of manipulating the situation to pull Wolf Frankenstein back into the situations that his ancestor was in and get all this stuff going. And of course, Boris Karloff eventually does come back, and he has a little, like, the monster's a little more intelligence in this one. And it's got everything you want from this type of movie, but I think it's a little more intelligent, I think, than some of the other movies and some of the dialogue. I think the characters are all really sharp, and there's just something special with the atmosphere, with the cast, everything in this movie. And I think there are some iconic things. I think there's specific things that would trickle down and get referenced in such movies as Young Frankenstein. I think it really added to the canon. So I really felt I wanted to have this one on my list. So Caleb, you said it just missed it for you. Thoughts on Son of Frankenstein?
Yeah, this one's really good. It was really a case of I wanted to give the other monsters and the other types of movies a shot here, but this one's really good. And you're right. I feel like Young Frankenstein is almost more inspired.
It is.
This one than the other two, but yeah, it's really good. Basil Rathbone is great. What's the actual name? Is it Victor Frankenstein?
It's Wolf Frankenstein.
Yeah. Wolf Frankenstein. That's right.
That's his character. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's great. And then obviously Bela Lugosi as Igor, I think, is probably the standout of this.
Absolutely.
Movie. Yeah.
And thoughts on this one, Kirk?
Yeah. I love Bela Lugosi. This Igor is such a great character, such a great villain, and you kind of need that for that catalyst for this story to work. And I love the idea of seeing almost like a real world aftermath. What would it look like if there was a Frankenstein monster?
Yeah, years later. The effects of it.
Exactly. Yeah, and I like that. So, I mean, it does have more of like a real world feel to it than the other two movies does. And again, I love just like that advancement of the lore and keeping that story going. So, yeah, I mean, this one, again, just like Caleb said, just barely missed my list, would be in the top 10.
All right, awesome. So we jump to our number 3s then. Number 3 for you, Caleb.
My number 3 is a different Frankenstein film, and it might be another. I don't know what we call them, but it's on somebody else's list probably. Bride of Frankenstein again.
Do you have this one, Kirk? Or you have?
I had. Yeah, this is my 4.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? I do have it higher. I have it higher, so we still have to wait. All right.
Okay.
So Kirk,
yeah. My number 3 is Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I have that higher.
I
Okay.
actually don't have it, but we'll wait till we get to Caleb. All
Sure.
right. So I think that. Oh yeah, my number three then. Yeah, I had to go with the guy who kind of started this whole thing. The iconic actor who really used makeup and craft to bring monsters to the screen. The great Lon Chaney Sr. And my number three is the Phantom of the Opera from 1925. Does anyone have this?
No, just this probably been my 6.
Okay. All right. So yeah, it's a great silent film. It kind of tells the story of Phantom of the Opera that we all know, but Lon Chaney had such great physicality, and obviously that really helps for a silent movie that's not as reliant on dialogue and stuff. You have title cards and seeing they're dancing and all that kind of stuff's going on. Yeah, but meanwhile he's behind the scenes, he's lurking in the shadows, he's in the loft, he's doing all this stuff. It really kind of creates this mood and this dread and everything. Like, who is this guy? What's going on with him? And what does he want from the Christine, the dancer, and everything? And then ultimately, the movie has one of the great builds, ever in a horror film, to the reveal where he's playing his organ and she goes to unveil him, and you see what his actual face looks like. It's one of the most famous images in cinema, and I think it's like Nosferatu. It still absolutely is potent and will stay with you. It doesn't matter how old it is. You see that image and you see that character in that film, and it's always going to last and stand the test of time. And I think, Lon Chaney's movies are really good. There's a lot of them. He did one called The Unknown. He did Hunchback of Notre Dame. His movies, they're well paced. They're really entertaining. So I always recommend people to go back to those films. It's like the silent comedies and stuff. There's certain movies from that period that are really entertaining, and you don't have to have a stigma of it's old, it's silent. These movies were made for popular audiences, and I think the talent and the craft involved makes them still for popular audiences. So that's my number three. Caleb, thoughts on Phantom of the Opera?
This one's really good. I love the atmosphere in this one. I couldn't quite move it above some of the little bit later ones, but it's really good.
And Kirk?
Yeah, like you said, iconic. Still one of the most famous, character creature designs of all time.
Yeah.
And so many great, we talked about with Dracula set in the atmosphere, so much great atmosphere. And, this one with the music and the organ and everything. And, that scene in the, with the masquerade ball where he comes out as the Red Death.
That's
and
great.
Just those costumes and everything. Just so many great scenes and moments in this movie. It just barely missed my list. I mean, like I said, I was working things out the last minute. This is when unfortunately I had to cut.
All right. Well, we're getting to the top pretty quick here. So we'll go to Caleb. What is your number two?
My number two was mentioned earlier. It's the creature from the Black Lagoon.
All right. So, why don't you go ahead and talk about it first, and then we'll get Kirk's thoughts on it after you, since he had a little lower.
The elephant in the room here, Steven Spielberg took a lot from this movie when he made Jaws, clearly inspired by it. But I mean, it's inspiration, and I think great movies inspire great movies.
Yeah.
Creature from the Black Lagoon is really, really good. I like a lot of them. The human characters, like in these movies, the human characters are great. I actually kind of like the human characters in this one. I kind of like the villain, who's maybe not villain, but the kind of morality tale going on here with the creature just should have been left alone, and I like
exactly.
That. And just the characters on the boat, and just the creature design itself is really cool. I like this one a lot.
And Kirk?
Yeah, this was my number three. This is, we're getting up, we're up in the 50s now. So, obviously technology is a lot better. The creature, the character design is great. That suit, that holds up. You look at that. That thing's seamless. I love those big hands, those big webbed hands, and the black over eyes and the gills moving and everything. It's such a great looking creature. It's probably out of all the, Universal monsters, probably the best just overall look to a creature. And like Caleb said, it has a lot of, taken from Jaws. I think almost like a Jurassic Park feel to it. A lot of influence down the road for other, creature, wild animals, like, should they be left alone? It's a very sympathetic creature. And like Like Boatman said, there's so much going on that boat, like decisions like, do we kill it? Do we study it? What do we belong here? So yeah, I love the fact that it's so condensed. It takes place in such a very small area. It's almost like just like a bottle episode. And but yeah, and all the underwater. I think there were. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think there was a different director for the underwater scenes.
I think that sounds right.
Yeah. And I know there were two different actors. There was for the creature.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the underwater stuff looks fantastic.
Especially for the time, it's pretty.
Visually, this is my favorite Universal monster movie.
Yeah, this one, like you guys were saying with some of the other movies, just outside my list. Obviously, it's iconic, it's classic. It kind of revitalized the Universal monster a little bit. You know, there hadn't really been a notable new Universal monster in quite a while, and coming in the 50s, this one really kind of hit. It just, for me personally, I just don't think I quite. Just for personal taste, enjoy the kind of 50s monster movie aesthetic as much as I do kind of the more moody German expressionist type, 30s and 40s ones. But That doesn't mean it's not a great movie and it doesn't deserve to be on the list. It really does. So, all right. So I believe that puts us at Kirk's number 2.
My number 2 is, I talked about the sequel earlier, the original Invisible Man.
That's higher up for me.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that brings me, spoilers, my number 2 is also the Invisible Man. So we're still waiting. So we do go to number 1. Why? So I guess we just stay with it. Now we go to Caleb for number 1.
My number 1 is the Invisible Man. Man, I really love this one. Obviously, Claude Rains is the main character. Claude Rains is one of the best actors of the 30s, and he's perfect here. And just kind of this idea of him kind of slowly losing the insanity, or his sanity, is great, and kind of going crazy, and how much power he really has, and how scary this his ability really can be. It's great. And then you have Henry Travers, Clarence in there. I really like this one. This is definitely my favorite because of the human element going on there. I think it's really good. I mean, he's the most literally human of the movie monsters, except for maybe the Wolfman. But, I mean, fantastic. I really love this one, and directed by James Whale, who directed so many other Universal monster films.
It's a very respectable number 1. Kirk and I were close, obviously. I really did consider putting it at that top spot. But Kirk, it's your number 2. What do you have to say about the Invisible Man?
I mean, Claude Rains, like Caleb said, is fantastic in this. He's the most fun Universal monster, I think. A lot of these other creatures, Wolfman, Frankenstein, Creature from Black Lagoon, there's like this morality, and they're sympathetic. With him, he's just all in, and he's all evil, and he's just out there doing it. And it's funny because Boatman said he's the most human in the fact that he's just a regular guy who happened to turn invisible, but at the same time, he's the most monstrous. If you look at the movies, he has the highest kill count of any of the Universal monsters, and just that mania he goes through. And again, the effects are fantastic. Supporting cast. It's Flores, played by Gloria Stewart, who we know better from Titanic.
That's true.
And so it's cool to see her there. Obviously when she was working full time. But yeah, it's just like I said, this is the movie. Like my number 1, and some of the other ones we'll talk about there on your guys' list. More serious tones, more serious themes. This one just I put this one on just to have fun with, and just watch Claude Rains go crazy. And this is definitely a strong number 2 for me.
Yeah, for me, I think my favorite subgenre of horror is sci-fi horror. I love, the idea of just something scientifically goes wrong, and then all these horrible things happen because of it. And something about that is so it gets my imagination going. And I just often have more fun with that than I do like some demon or a ghoul or something supernatural that we can't explain. It's the fact that we know what it is.
Yeah.
Somebody was trying to accomplish something, whether it's Dr. Jekyll or whether it's the Fly or whatever it is, they're trying to do something, goes wrong, and there's kind of it's good. We know this is going to happen, and you can't stop it. And the idea that this guy is trying to do this experiment. Yeah, he does go invisible, but we know right away that it has the side effect of him going crazy. So he's got the power of invisibility, but he's basically a raving psychopath, and we just go with that. And I think the effects you got for the time they still really work. I think like his pajamas walking around by themselves, all the different things that they do, chairs moving and everything. And when he like the great scene scene where he has the bandages and he takes the bandages off. It's still, I think maybe the black and white helps, but it just makes it really still kind of feel real, and you can buy into it. And it's amazing. This is, getting closer to 100 years old, these movies. And it's amazing that, you can still watch them and buy into them in that way. And I think a lot of the great Universal movie horror monster movies have this, but the great supporting cast of just like all the bit players, all of the characters that wander in and out. I think Invisible Man is one of the best. All the people that are coming in out of the inn where a lot of the action happens. It's so much fun to see all these different people and how they react to what's going on. The police who like hole up there and they're trying to figure it all out and see what they can do, and they're kind of outmatched. And it really it's kind of like more horror movies you get today. It's like it's a series of kills. Like he's committing these acts. The great car scene with the car going off the cliff. That's the kind of thing you could see in a horror movie in the 90s or like today. Like it's the kill scenes and this movie kind of helped pioneer that. So yeah, it was way up there for me, and I think it actually gets a little underrated. I think when people talk about the Frankensteins and the Draculas and everything, like this movie is so well made. All right, so we continue with our number ones. What did you have as your number one, Kirk?
My number one is the original Frankenstein.
All right. You can see I don't think either Caleb and I had it, but
no.
Obviously a great choice. So
and I know I am in the minority because most people I think prefer Bride, and obviously you guys do. I think you both had on your list. So, but Frankenstein, for that original story for me, Karloff just plays this character so perfect. And the scene, and I've talked about this a lot in different shows in the community, so you may have heard me say this before, but the scene that always gets me is when he's in that tower and he looks up and the roof's open, he just looks up to the sky, and it's like, why? And it's like that is all of us. He's just thrown here. He's made by the people who made him have no idea what to do with him. He doesn't know why he's here, and he's just screwing everything up. And there's no character in movies I think I can relate to more than that. And he's just such a human character. I mean, he's the most human in that aspect to me. And this is one of the times, most of these movies they kind of alter the source material. I think this is the one where they alter the source material and it actually works the best. They changed the themes. In this one, the monster's a little more sympathetic than he is in the books. In the original Mary Shelley novel, he's actually much more intelligent and more conniving and more dangerous that way. And I think in the book he represents that aspect of humanity, but in the movie he represents something different. I think that works better. And I know, like I said, most people like Bride better, and we'll talk about Bride. But for me, just the foundation that this sets with that character and the performance, that silent performance that Karloff gives, is so brilliant. So this is my, without a doubt, number one.
Yeah, a great pick. I know it didn't get there for you, Caleb, but thoughts on Frankenstein?
It's fantastic. I mean, for so many of these movies, it was kind of hard when you only have 5 options. But I mean, it's great. It's the original. Colin Clive really gets to shine in this one. Fantastic. And the atmosphere here really, really pays off. It's just a case of I just kind of prefer Bride a little bit more, and I kind of wanted to showcase the other ones, so I kind of had to choose between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it's one of those cases like I just did another episode, and it's like, you want to try to give some love to some other movies that people don't talk about quite as much, and like highlight other things. And in all rights, this movie is really in my top 5. But I just thought I would replace it with Son of Frankenstein just so I could kind of give a little more light to that movie, because I think that movie deserves some real discussion. It's great, but for me, this one really. If I'm being fully honest, it really is in my top 5 because it really is great and iconic, and really is chilling in moments. Like the moment when Fritz, the helper, dies, and you see like the reflection of him hanging from the shadow hanging from the chains there, like that. That's really chilling for an old movie. And then, of course, there's the infamous scene with the monster and the little girl, which was actually cut out of the movie for a long time. And I actually, when I was a kid, that was the version I saw, and I was so confused because basically all it is he goes up to the little girl, and then it cuts, and then you see the father carrying the dead body of the girl, and you're like, what happened? And it actually was kind of chilling because it's like something happened. I guess he just killed her. But then the scene that they had taken out, that is the actual scene, is she shows him she's throwing flowers into the water, and he sees her throwing the flowers, and he's basically just a child because he was just born. He's got this kind of malfunctioning brain that they put in, and he's like, he makes some odd connection, and he picks up the little girl and throws her in the water because he thinks that's what he's supposed to do. And then you see the father, and it's it's kind of like you feel sympathy for him. He wasn't like, he's not maliciously trying to hurt children, but it's just he doesn't understand, and it's a tragic situation, and obviously that leads to the big tragic ending. And with the wind tower, which the mill and everything, the fire, which was such a great, like, obviously we're truncating the book, we're not doing all of the stuff that happens in the book, we're just going to kind of do the basic bullet points and cut it a little sooner. And the idea of adding that ending, as opposed to this whole elongated thing that you get in the book where he's Victor Frankenstein's chasing the monster across, all of Europe, and they go into the north and they're in the ice and everything, like this whole like action sequence that you get in the book. Like, let's do something else. And it's just, he killed the girl. The townspeople know something happened. They're after him. They get him in the mill where they've established that he's afraid of fire. And it's so well done. And these movies, one thing we didn't mention is they're really short. Like, this is an hour and 15-minute film, and you really do get the full effect in it. So it's a great, again, maybe some of the pacing and some of the dialogue and stuff, it does, it is that really early era of sound film. But for me, I appreciate it a little more than Dracula. So it's a great number one. And it feeds right into my number one, which is The Bride of Frankenstein, where 4 years later, after the first one, James Whale got to come back. And I feel like maybe he got a little more freedom to kind of, we're not doing the basic Frankenstein story. We're going to kind of take go in some different directions with it, bring in some new characters. And I just think what he did with this sequel is so impressive. There's so many amazing creative touches. I think it was really cool, saying, we're still celebrating Mary Shelley's, book. We're still going back to that. So to have Elsa Lanchester in the beginning actually playing Mary Shelley, like, they're coming up with the story like she did, at a house with all these great writers, and she's kind of coming up with it. She's telling it. And then you get into this story, and it actually does continue. There's some passages from the book that they bring back. There's the great scene with the blind man later on that is so well spoofed in Young Frankenstein, but that scene comes from the book. I think, the monster character of Boris Karloff is growing a little bit. He's becoming a little more intelligent, being able to speak a little bit. And I think he becomes even more sympathetic in this film, because this gets into what the real crux of the book is, which is the whole arc of the monster in the Mary Shelley book is basically he was a child that was rejected by his maker. Victor Frankenstein looked at him, thought he was ugly and a monster, and cast him away. And he's like trying to find some sort of connection. And he comes to the, basically the realization that he wants a partner. He wants somebody to share his life with. So he realizes, Victor Frankenstein did this once, he can do it again. So he goes back to him and asks him to make him a bride. And then Victor betrays him a second time. So that sets up the tragic ending. But in this, they construct this whole other narrative where there's this other villain, Dr. Pretorius, who's a really great character. And there's this odd kind of relationship between him and Victor. And then ultimately it all does lead to the bride. And how ingenious it was to have Elsa Lanchester also play the bride, who we saw playing Mary Shelley in the beginning of the film. And obviously the iconic makeup on her, the hair, that no one could ever forget. They knew they had to do something striking you know, with that, you know, legendary makeup they had created for the monster in the first film. So it's really, I think, a slam dunk what they came up with her. And it's tragic, you know, in the book, he never got to see, like, Victor destroyed the bride before she could come to life. But in this one, she does come to life, and she looks at him, and she, you know, hates him, and it's tragic. And then, you know, and then he's like, well, I have no reason now. And it's like you said with the first film, he's such a tragic character, and that's why there's two Frankenstein movies on my list, because there's something about that story and that character that really resonates in a way that, you know, not very many horror movies do. So it really was number one for me. So Caleb, you had it on your list. Thoughts on Bride of Frankenstein?
I love this one, and I want to talk about this was actually the first one I saw, and I saw it because there's a little indie movie theater like this.
Oh, nice.
Play. And like it was 2 summers ago, and they actually like showed it, and they had all this like old memorabilia from like the 30s and 40s that they had there, because there's this guy who was like super into Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. So they had like all these posters and all these collectibles. It was super cool, and then you just seeing that on the big screen was just awesome.
Oh wow! I bet it was.
Yeah, that was the first one I had ever seen, and I love that. I really like this one. And that moment when the bride finally sees Frankenstein and she's afraid of him, that's amazing. And another thing that I really love that I didn't talk about when we talked about Frankenstein, and Bride of Frankenstein also does this, the opening credits, when it says who plays the bride, it's a question mark.
I love that. They did that the first one. That is great. Yeah. All right. Thoughts on this one, Kurt?
Yeah, I mean, this was my number 4, so I mean that's highly rated for me too. Right. Yeah. And I think the cool thing about this is I think the character of Dr. Frankenstein becomes a lot more interesting in this movie, because you really start to see like the extent of his mania, where he wants out, you know, but it's so, you know, that the temptation, that power that he has to create life, he's so easily drawn back in. And that Dr. Praetorius is such a good character and such a good catalyst for that. A lot of cool effects when he makes like the little people. And, like,
I forgot to mention the effects with the little people. It's really cool.
Yeah, and it just I was surprised when I saw it how how the bride's, that scene, that iconic scene is really her only scene. She's not in it that much. But yeah, again, it just adds the tragedy of the character. For me, like I said, I think the foundation of that, and I saw Frankenstein first before I saw Bride. So I think, I was so impacted by that original, what I saw the first time, that's why it's higher for me. And I think just having seen this later in my life and seen all the parody of Frankenstein before, this is where you get the blind guy from Young Frankenstein. Frankenstein. All like the fire bad, all that stuff. That's where all this comes from. So I think, that may have been in my mind too, but that's why it's a couple notches lower than the original. But they're both. It's like 1A and 1B. They're both fantastic.
Absolutely. So that's our list. Let's go ahead and get into some honorable mentions. I will start with Caleb. What other movies would you like to talk about?
I mean, we talked about some of them. Son of Frankenstein. I like that one a lot. One that I don't love, but I love things about it, is The Mummy. I like the atmosphere in that one a lot, and there's a lot of good things about it. But it's a little too similar to Dracula. There's things that don't work, but I do want to shout that one out because Boris Karloff is just brilliant in everything. Yeah. And The Wolfman. The Wolfman's a classic for the reason I like that one a lot. Lon Chaney Jr. is great.
Honorable mentions, Kirk.
We did talk about some of them. Phantom, like I said, that would have been my number 6. That's actually the first one of these I've ever seen. I saw that a long time ago when I was a kid, and I've always been, I've always loved that character and that story, and it's so well told. Like Caleb said, The Wolfman is it's such a great story. Lon Chaney Jr., that's really good, and that's another really sympathetic story, really sad story when you look at it. Sort of like that one. Son of Frankenstein, that was close on my list. That was good. And that was again, that's one that just, I like to see the expansion of that lore. We talked about how, with Dr. Frankenstein's minion, you see how in that movie it becomes, generational.
Absolutely.
And how it carries over. So I really like that one. And I'm looking up the last, I forget which one I just watched the other day. I forget. It's it was The House of Dracula.
Yeah.
Again, this is another one. Like it's not a great movie. It's a lot of sloppy in parts, but it's fun because it just brings together all the different characters.
They're like it's like the Avengers movies of the
exactly.
40s.
Yeah, exactly.
They brought them all together. They were all building up to come together, and it took several movies to get there too, because they did Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, brought those two together, and then they had House and Frankenstein, House of Dracula, where you got all of them. So it's, those are really cool to mention.
Yeah.
All right, and then for me, kind of going chronologically here, I also love the Lon Chaney Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think that's a really great version of that. His agility and acrobatics, up on the bell tower and everything is, really impressive. More like if this guy really was living in the bell tower and all this stuff, he would, be running up and down all the time and doing all this stuff. And that really convinces you in that version. And then, The Mummy with Boris Karloff. I actually really love that movie. I think the opening, when the mummy first comes to life and the guy sees him and just instantly goes insane, is one of the more just a really unforgettable scene. And there's some really interesting themes and a great performance from Boris in that one. While we're and then a great sequel that people don't talk about as much, Dracula's Daughter. Actually, Gloria Holden plays the daughter of Dracula. I think she's actually in London in that movie, preying on mostly women. And there are some interesting undertones for a movie from that time with, this woman preying on other women's. And it's a really atmospheric, kind of underrated movie there. And then also on the theme of the mummy, they did a whole other mummy series in the 40s. The Mummy this time was called, instead of Imhotep, it was Karis. And the first one of those is called The Mummy's Hand. And they're not really great movies, but they're really kind of fun. It's about, these more kind of almost comedic characters on a dig. And you find out there was a princess and there was this guy, Karis, who had to guard her. He is like the guard of her, and he is reactivated, and he's like the guard, and he's got to protect, and he's, taking people out and stuff. And this story kind of continues. And the interesting little side note is, when years later there was Hammer Studios in England with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, when they did their version of The Mummy, and they called it The Mummy, it's actually not a remake of The Mummy with Boris Karloff. It's a remake of The Mummy's Hand with the character of Karis. So it's kind of an interesting little footnote how these movies had different, legacies and influence on things. And then, yes, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. I think it's a really fun, meshing of those two characters. And then the Wolfman, I think is a really good film. It was very close for me to making the list. And then, yes, Creature from the Black Lagoon, of course. So that brings us to...
I want to add one more I forgot to say.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know you'll appreciate this, Jeremy. It's a movie that wasn't really eligible for the list, but it draws so much from this using characters that I wanted to bring it up was Monster Squad. Just a great. I don't even think I don't even know if that was a Universal movie.
No, I don't think it's actually Universal.
Yeah,
I think that's why it doesn't show up on those lists.
Sure, but it brings all those characters together.
It's worth a mention.
Yeah, it's
having all those
such a great use of all those characters. Just a great story to bring them together.
I don't think there's a better moment when the cool kid is drinking the Pepsi and the kid comes up to him and just says, "Hey, you know any virgins?"
Because you need him for Dracula. Right? But I mean, you could mention, the reboot. I think the Brendan Fraser Mummy is, some people like that movie, and it's maybe even worth a little bit of a mention. But I gotta give Jacoby at least a little love there. But these, hopefully they'll bring him back at some point and do it right and do it better than they have in recent years. That would be awesome.
Tom Cruise Mummy.
Yeah, that they they had a good idea with the Dark Universe, because they did the Dark Universe, like we said, back in the 40s with the House films. So it's doable. It's just a matter of getting the right pieces together. So hopefully we'll see that. But before we wrap up here, I'm actually, like I said, not the host of this show. It's actually Dan Skip Allen, and he actually sent me his list. So I give him a little love and go through it real quick. His number 5 is Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. His number 4 is Dracula. His number 3 is The Mummy. His number 2 is The Wolfman. And his number 1, Man After My Own Heart, is The Bride of Frankenstein. And as honorable mentions, he has The Invisible Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein, and House of Frankenstein. So good list there, Dan. Hope you feel better, my friend. It's good to shout you out. So before we wrap things up, let's do a little recap. What was your top 5 there, Caleb?
Yes, my number 5 was Dracula. My number 4 was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. My number 3 was Bride of Frankenstein. My number 2 was The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And my number 1 was The Invisible Man.
And your list, Kirk?
My number 5 was Invisible Man Returns. My number 4 was Bride of Frankenstein. My number 3 was The Creature from the Black Lagoon. My number 2 was The Invisible Man. And my number 1 was Frankenstein.
And my number 5 is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Number 4, Son of Frankenstein. Number 3, Phantom of the Opera from 1925. 2, The Invisible Man. And number 1, Bride of Frankenstein. All right, so we've come to the end. Let's see, get some plugs from everybody. Caleb, where can we find you on the internet?
Yes, you can find me personally on Letterboxd at Caleb Boatman and on Twitter at BCUS_I'm Boatman. You can also find me at Multiplex, where I run Movie Warzone, where we just had a free-for-all, where this man up here may or may not have won the whole thing and did a really good job.
Check that out, everybody. The Multiplex free-for-all. It's a great
Fun
episode.
Yep.
All right, and Kirk?
Yeah, I'm all over the Fan League stuff. Anywhere you see Jeremy or Caleb or Dan, you probably find me lurking in the background somewhere. And you can follow me on Letterboxd, so I'm just not screaming to myself like a maniac.
And you can find me, Jeremy Paul Adams, on Facebook and YouTube. I believe Jeremy Move Buff on Twitter. And yes, I am one of the showrunners at Full Metal Trivia, sister league of Multiplex there, doing great movie trivia stuff and content there. We've got our big event, the Snowball, coming up soon. So you guys can check out all our big title matches and everything for the year. You might be seeing, Kirk and myself and some other people popping up in some of those matches. So that'll be worth checking out. And I know everyone in this community is a fan of the Movie Trivia Schmodown. I'm a question writer for them, so they actually are ramping up. They've got the first of a new match of the season dropping soon, so check out all their content on the Schmodown Entertainment Network on YouTube. And then just quick plugs for the man who is in charge here, Dan Skip Allen. You can find old articles that he's written at cinesportstalk.com, and currently the work that he's doing at disappointmentmedia.com, disappointmentmedia.com. All right, so that brings us to the end tonight, guys. So stay creepy, get chilled, hang out with your favorite monster, and we'll check you out next time on the Top 5 Weekly. We are out.